Hi, everyone. Welcome to another edition of the VUU, the Church of the Larger Fellowship's weekly talk show. I am Cristina Rivera, and I'm coming to you from beautiful Stanton, Virginia, where it's just gorgeous, gorgeous spring weather. Yay! So excited for that. And we're excited this Thursday to have Carrie Gottfried and Tanner Linden here to talk about what it's like to be a UU young adult in this new world that we are co-creating together right now. But before we get to them, I'd like to have the rest of our co-hosts, VUU co-hosts, introduce themselves. Aisha, how you doing?
I'm Aisha Hauser and I'm in Seattle, Washington. I don't know. I felt like I hit a wall this week and was super weepy, was over this and knowing that it's gonna be a long time. And the weather's gorgeous. So I'm wearing birds today. I don't know if you could see because I've been just seeing so many birds. They probably were there, but because I was rushing to go places, I just never noticed them. But I'm like, there are a lot more. Are there more birds? Or so that's been fun. I'm trying to just connect with nature here in the city of Seattle. And so in the middle of my weeping, I'm like, oh look, bird. So that's been fun. Meg, how are you?
Hi, I'm in Minneapolis, Minnesota, where the snow is melting. It's going to be, it was beautiful and then it snowed. It's going to be 60 on Saturday, though, so I'm already excited. And yeah, there are birds. I mean, there are more birds. I live under an airport, and I have to say, I love the absence of planes. I mean, it is so much more peaceful here. And yeah, a sandhill crane flew over my house this week. And, there are bald eagles everywhere in Minneapolis, so I see them all the time. But yeah, blue herons, green herons. A loon was down at the lake down the block, kind of on its way north. But those loon sounds are so amazing. So yeah, the birds are wonderful company, and I think they're loving the absence of planes even more than I am. So, but I've just noticed it makes such a difference, especially when I'm out in the yard. It used to be neighbors would come by and every 3 minutes we just have to stop and be quiet and wait, like it's a little silent meditation until the plane went by. And so it's great to not be doing that. Antonia.
Hey, I'm in Wilmington, Delaware, and things are going pretty well here. We've had some thunderstorms, and I believe today is a little bit cooler.
Most folks may have heard by now that our General Assembly, which was scheduled for Providence, Rhode Island in June, has now been changed over to a virtual General Assembly. And so that's going to be different for us all. I know the folks at the GAPC, which is the GA Planning Committee, and the UUA and the board are all working just so hard to reimagine what that can look like. And one of my friends yesterday on Facebook said, I know it's going to be great. I know it's going to be different. I know there's going to be things that are really awesome, but I just need some time to feel sad about it. So before we get to all the really awesome things, can people just make space for people to be sad? And I think that that's really important framework as we go through all of these losses, that we're going to be going through and have been going through, over time, is just to remember to let people be sad before you go, but oh, it's going to be great because X, Y, or Z. Yeah, it will be, but let people let people have their feelings about this for a little bit. I'm sure Carrie and Tanner probably have some feelings about it, having experienced synergy and bridging, at General Assembly, and that's not something that this cohort of seniors are going to be able to experience in the same way. So I think there's something there.
Yeah, I think that's such an important point. I'd planned to cross the stage to retire at GA. And there are people with all kinds of transitions that we had looked to marking at General Assembly that will happen differently. And I think, for me, I can hold simultaneously the knowledge of how privileged I am and how lucky I am and how other people have it a lot harder, and that there are very real losses still, and that I get to grieve those, and I get to have both. And I get to have that without, being ashamed that I'm sad about something like not crossing a stage when other people don't have food to eat. Like and it's all loss. There are just all kinds of losses for all kinds of people. And yeah, just not seeing the people. It's a thing. I
I
mean,
miss so many people. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry. Yeah, it's not, I so many things, and hopefully I'm gonna see the RECC next week, but that would have been also on this, I would have been on the stage. And my daughter's college commencement they're saying postponed, but whenever it happens. And she cried for 2 days, and she said to me, Mom, I know that this isn't important, but I'm sad. I said, it is important. And yes, it's just what you said, Meg, we can acknowledge how privileged we are and be sad. You only graduate college once, and GA, I'm gonna miss. I realize that I'm an extrovert, and I love my family, and I'm just seeing the same people. I'm like, oh, I really loved the variety of all the people I have in my life, and I miss them. I just want to name that too. And Meg, you and Charles Dumond were going to be. Do you get sworn in? I don't even know. Do you
well,
as moderator?
right. There will still be some online version of the uncontested election that would have happened in person. And, I feel sadder for Barb and Alandria, who have worked so hard for 5 years and don't get celebrated in public. Although when I asked them about it, they both kind of shuddered and said they're introverts. That does not sound like something that they would have loved. But I think celebrating work well done is really important. And Aisha, you kind of buried the lead a bit about you're doing what next week?
So I'm going to see the committee twice for the credential level and the master level religious education credential. Use the word credential a lot. So it is analogous to the ministerial fellowship committee, and it's for religious educators. So I handed in 2 portfolios and many, many essays. And so it'll be the culmination. I'm more nervous. I'm surprised at how nervous I am. I'm like, and I think partly because it's Zoom, and we've been dealing with a global pandemic, and I'm like, I'm too stressed to do it. That was part of my tears. I have to be prepared and concentrate. Yeah, this is now public for everyone to see. So yeah, that's what I'm doing next week. Thank you, Meg.
You and others. So shout out to everyone who's doing that, both the commission, the commission, the folks who have to stay on Zoom for a really, really long time, as did the MFC, and the folks who have to, polish up being on Zoom in the middle of a pandemic. Everything is different. Everything that we're doing is just so different. But and also, Christina, you mentioned other transitions going on in our congregations right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing I did want to mention to folks, just as a point of information for them, definitely check out what the GAPC and UUA are doing for GA registration. If you've already registered, there's some information about what you can do with your registration fee, which I think is just fabulous. I'll let you all go and find it, but really check it out. It's really awesome how they're structuring this.
And shout out to LaTanya Broom. We must give LaTanya first year.
Amazing contract renegotiation. Woohoo!
Yes, this is LaTanya's first year as the head of the conferences and planning group at the UUA, and just God bless, because she's just doing a great job, and under really, really difficult circumstances. So whoop, whoop, go girl. Oh yeah, so the other thing that we saw a lot of this week was announcements from congregations who are in search of their candidates. Yay! So, talk about another thing that's got to be just completely different this time around, trying to do your search process while in a pandemic and doing it all virtually. So we're just seeing some great news of, placements and welcomes and all of those kinds of things. Of course, this is the candidating period, which means it's kind of like the final engagement period before the full-on call. So just sending out a lot of blessings to all the congregations that are working through that.
And did you see there's online ordinations going to happen? That's cool.
Yes, online ordinations.
Margalit, our former host here, is going to do an online ordination.
Yeah.
On the 30th.
And and I think Elizabeth Mount might be doing online ordination as well. So yeah, it just, way to go for all the folks that are just having to pivot in a really difficult time. Anything else for our roundup? I don't think so. I think those were the highlights. Well, we are so excited to welcome Carrie and Tanner. Thank you both so much for saying yes when we texted. Carrie is a lifelong, long life and lifelong UU, studying political science and religion at Wesley College. She has been active youth and young adult leader in UU communities over the past few years. I'll just mention she was the senior dean of the UU GA Youth Caucus, now Youth at GA, I think it is, or GA Youth. Tanner is a lifelong Unitarian Universalist and self-described evangelist. He serves as the outreach coordinator for the Church of the Ledger Fellowship. And Tanner's experienced with social media manager and avid communicator who wants to use his skills to help more people find and connect with Unitarian Universalism. Right on, Tanner. Before joining the CLF, Tanner served congregations in Southern California, Arizona, and Nevada as the Youth and Young Adult Communications Director. Welcome, Tanner and Carrie. Thank you so much for being here.
And Tanner and Kristen, you were on the UUA board together, right?
We were. We served on the UUA board together during some really tumultuous times. Tanner was there just through, some was one of the, I think, over the span of everything that happened in 2017, 2018, we had 2 or 3 different what were youth observers and became youth trustees. And Tanner was right in the mix of that. So I guess my first question to you both is where are you in terms of having to do social distancing in your young adult life now? What is that looking like for you?
So for me, I go to college at Wellesley in Massachusetts, and my family's in Oregon. So when this was all starting at the beginning of March and colleges started sending their students home, we were kind of waiting, not sure if we'd be sent home, and eventually we were. So then I flew back home to Oregon pretty suddenly, packed up all my things, and I was in self-isolation as best as I could be for 2 weeks just to make sure I didn't pass anything to my family. Looks like I didn't, and now I'm back hanging out home with my parents and my younger sister and doing my classes online from the West Coast on an East Coast time zone. So that's been my life for the past few weeks.
So we are, I'm in California and we've been on shelter in place for the last few weeks, and they've extended it till mid-May now. Of course, the deadline, they're just going to keep extending and extending. So that's where we're at here. Formally, before I was laid off, I had a second job at the Santa Barbara Zoo, and we're a tourism attraction. So we were watching this really closely in the beginning, especially as cases started to pop up in California. And our executive team had really good foresight. They thought we were going to close kind of weeks and weeks and weeks before any shelter in place order. So I started working from home for them way sooner. And then the shelter in place orders came, and I already did online university. So I feel like I've been stuck at home for like months. Even though it's only been like an actual month, it feels like forever. So that's where I'm at, cooped up at home. But I'm so grateful to have food, and like I'm trying to focus on the things that I have and not the things I don't right now. But also I really liked what you said, Christina, about like being able to be sad. There are definitely things we can be sad about. And for me personally, I'm trying to focus on like the things that I can be grateful for because it helps me, but also leaving room for sadness.
How are you connecting with your peers right now? So now both of you have, I imagine, especially because you grew up UU youth, there's peers everywhere. And what are some of the things are you doing that, connecting with each other?
Well, I actually would like to say I think that there's never been a better time to be a young adult in Unitarian Universalism. The resources that are coming out of the UUA and regional groups and things that are being started by young adults themselves are just so incredible. Um, and because everything's virtual, one really hard thing with young adults is, they're traveling all over, everybody's spread out, it's hard to connect people. But now that we all are connecting online, it makes it actually really easy for us to be together in a virtual space. So I have had the chance over the past month to be in communities online with young adults from all over the country, from young adults from the Pacific Western region, from my college, and that has been really, really great. And some of them have been just casual hangouts where we all get to talk, and other ones have been more intentional spaces where we light a chalice, sing songs, have some reflection time. And I've really, really been grateful for that.
I've always before COVID-19 and for many years have known and told people that it's not enough for youth and young adults to get spiritual sustenance by just showing up to their bricks and mortar congregation on Sunday morning. Some youth and young adults, maybe that's all the spiritual fulfillment they need, and I see that and I hold that. For me, that was never true. I always needed a community outside of my congregation because I was one of the only youth. Currently, I'm one of the only emerging adults. There are young adults, but they're like late 20s, early 30s. And that's not the group that I'm, clicking with right now. So I like to think that we've had practice as emerging adults with going and finding that community outside of our physical areas, because there's really close to me, there's not a lot of youth or emerging adults growing up through the years. The peers that I felt closest to were far, on the East Coast and things like that. So it's been kind of nice to have that scaffolding already built in to our communication. Like, we're used to not seeing each other. We're used to having to reach out and only seeing each other a few times a year. The thing that's hard is now we don't have those few times a year. And so like changing and adapting to how we communicate and like how we can be together is like really, really important in this moment.
I always, when I came to CLF and Church of the Younger Fellowship was a thing that was kind of dying when I got there. And as I talked to many young adults, emerging adults, what I learned was this thing called Fuse that predated Facebook, which was a UU created social media network where apparently young adults and emerging adults talk to each other all the time. But then Facebook came and everybody gradually dropped that and moved. And so there was this real like lament. And these people are now in their late 30s, or maybe even 40 who were part of that. But I wonder now, because, I came to CLF 10 years ago thinking we'll build an online church. And like, I brought in a number of ministers specifically to work, and I worked with Monica Cummins, and I tried all these different ways. And I think, as you said, Carrie, young adults were so busy and so on the fly that really building something worshipful, that's what we were trying to do. So I wonder if that's happening now. Is there worship going on for young adults somewhere that I don't know about? Is someone doing that? Is there a role for CLF to jump in and do something, try again, like what's up?
Yeah, I can hop on that one. Meg, that's a great question. I'm glad you prompted it. I've been working with the emerging adult specialist, so to say, with the UUA to put together a CLF sponsored emerging adult worship service. We have about 12 emerging adults who are interested. And right now it's just solidifying all those folks' roles. So I'm individually reaching out to each person. Once everyone is confirmed, we'll start gathering online and worship planning. And it's still forming. And at the CLF, as you know, Meg, and other folks, we're trying not to move. We're trying to move at a sustainable rate. If it was my choice, we would have emerging adult worship tomorrow. But that doesn't make sense. We want to take our time and do it right, because we know this isn't going to be over in 2 weeks. We know we're going to have to do the social distancing, things like that for a while. So there are things in the works, I guess I would say, and there are emerging adults who are talking and getting things planned. It's just a matter of all the puzzle pieces falling in the right place.
I also think that there are some amazing people doing worship, young adult worship all over the country. One interesting thing is in a lot of spaces that UUs have created for marginalized communities, communities that may not be represented as much in our congregations, they're communities that don't, like, it's an identity that you hold with you all for all of your life. And being a young adult isn't that one of those identities. And so I think that's one challenge, is finding enough younger leadership to be able to create a sustainable community without people who aren't going to be there forever. One community I'm a part of is Sanctuary Boston, and it was started as a community to center young adult voices in worship. And it still does that, but a lot of the people who founded that community are now kind of aging out of that young adult age range. And so the question is it going to evolve with them or bring new voices in, or some mix of both? So I think that is something we really have to consider, as well as, young adults are very busy people. So it's hard to figure out how much time we're all able to donate without getting completely burnt out. I just started going to Sanctuary this year, and I wanted to be, jump all in and be super involved. And they do a great job of, like with the CLF, moving at a sustainable rate. So right now I'm doing the slideshow for the online worship, and I think that's perfect because it's something that makes me feel important and involved, and I'm not going to be, after a year, just completely exhausted and never going to go again. But Sanctuary Boston is one of those communities now that we've moved online that's offering worships that are open. And we used to have maybe 30 or 40 people coming to the in-person services, and the ones we have on Zoom have gone over 100 people each. So that's something that I've really loved being able to be a part of, and to also share with my friends who didn't have the privilege of going to college in Boston and having that community right on their doorstep.
That's great. Have they had to adapt how they do worship as it's grown from 30 or 40 to 100?
Yeah, definitely. And also with all of the people who want to, cause disruption on Zoom, we've had to tighten our settings and it makes it a little bit less collaborative, because not everybody's able to share in the worship. One of the things we have in-person worship is Joys and Sorrows time, where people are able to stand up, introduce themselves, and share. And actually, it's been really beautiful using the chat box, and everybody can just send in their joys and their sorrows. And it's beautiful to see, like, all of them flooding in and everybody being able to hold all of that in one space.
Yeah, CLF also. I think this is true for the bricks and mortars going online. It's true of the little place that I'm interim. Yeah, we probably quadrupled weekly worship, and we used to do Joys and Sorrows as a little 3-minute video, and now it's much longer. And we say, don't even try to read this, just let it wash over you and be part of humanity. And it's amazing, both the grief and gratitude is how I'm thinking of it, and both of them are so profound. New babies are still being born, and, amazing things are happening. So it's wonderful to mix it all up. Aisha, is your church growing online too?
Yeah, we've had so we do offer 2 services through Zoom, 9 and 11, and our attendance has increased, and people who just for many reasons haven't been able to attend on Sunday morning have loved being online. And we do coffee hour, and so we're just friendlier because you can stay, and then people get broken up into rooms randomly, and folks are talking to people they never would have walked up to in person, and getting to know each other. So the dynamic, what I'm hoping, one of the things we've been thinking about is, well, what are we going to keep eventually many months from now when we are back in person? What are we going to keep and what are we going to let go of? Because there is, I don't know if people, we're just, we're creatures of habit. And I do the same thing. When I'm at GA, I go right to the people I know. I don't necessarily start introducing myself to people I don't know. So I totally can empathize with that in coffee hour. You just want to see the friend you know. However, when you're given the opportunity to get to meet new people in a different way, it's quite profound and compelling. And I'm, hopeful that folks hold on to that, or we do some kind of hybrid so we don't leave people out. So there's a lot of opportunity here for Unitarian Universalism. But we've seen, and I've heard that anecdotally, that almost anybody who I've asked has said, oh yeah, we've had a lot more people online.
So, Tanner, you mentioned, and Carrie, you as well, that the young adult community has always had to use the virtual space more than a lot of our bricks and mortar churches. What do you think? What do you think that we can learn from how you all have built that community and using that to kind of sustain ourselves? Because I think we're all clear that this is going to go on a lot longer than any of us had, expected when it started. And so I think, it would be great if we acknowledge that there's some groups that have been doing this for a while successfully, and maybe we should ask them for their advice.
One thing I want to lift up in response to that, but it doesn't answer the question exactly, is that something I've always thought to be really important, and I think Carrie hinted to this, is that the most profound emerging adult and young adult spaces I've been in have been led by and championed by and created by emerging adults and young adults themselves. It's really hard when an outside, Meg, you talked about the difficulty of bringing in, ministers and things like that to come and build young adult communities. I think it's really difficult to do that as an outside force, so to say, to come in and say, it's one thing to say, I want emerging adult community as someone who's not an emerging adult. And then it's another thing to have an emerging adult say, all right, let's build this community. Let's do it together. So I think that's always been really important. And then more towards your question about, how is online connection sustainable, or how can we do it better? I don't think any community has the perfect answer for that, of course. One thing that I've been struggling with personally has been, do I feel more connected when I'm having these conversations over Zoom? Or do I feel less connected because I can't physically see the person? I don't know if anyone else is feeling that grief of, like, I get to see all these amazing people on Zoom, but it just reminds me that I can't physically see them and hug them and be with them. So that's something I've been struggling with. And specifically for my fellow young adults who I normally wouldn't be on Zoom outside of if we're on a committee together or something. Usually I would be, either messaging them until I see them in person and vice versa. So that's been difficult for me. And I'm sure Carrie has lots of ideas. So I'm going to pass it to her.
Yeah, actually, I agree that it's important to have emerging adults at the center of things that are made for them. But also something that I really appreciate as a super involved youth who was on the verge of burning out, but then bridged and kind of had a little bit of a break from that, is I love it when I don't have to be in charge of everything I want to be a part of. And I love it when I can just be in a space and have that space held for me. So I want to give a big shout out to Stevie Carmody. Reverend Stevie is the emerging adult ministry specialist at the UUA. And as soon as this hit and we were all being quarantined, he immediately jumped into action. And we've had some incredible intentional community small group check-ins that have been just so wonderful to just show up at and not have to show up if I wasn't feeling it, and not feel any obligation, but also know that I would be completely welcome. And those were based off of Casey Stainsby at the Canadian Unitarian Council, who has been holding those groups for young adults in Canada for a while now. And you know, Canada is even harder to be a UU young adult in because it's even more spread out. There's less people. And so having that space, I've been showing up at them as an honorary Canadian UU. And I love just being able to be in a space where I may not know any of the other people in that group, but we are all people of faith. We're all young adults and we can find something to connect on. And then on a regional level, also Cameron Young and Eric Bliss are doing some great work. And they're all a little bit older than the emerging adult, young adult range, but they've worked a lot with young adults and emerging adults and know how to hold that space. So I think that a good combination of emerging adult buy-in with also support from older adults and even older young adults is really important.
So one of the questions we have actually relates to something that you all have been saying, and we've been just kind of using this language. Darby Lockridge says, one of the challenges I had to create a young adult community was bridging the huge gaps in lifestyle. Some are students, other had big families already, big income disparities as anyone else. And I think it's really important that we've created this, so young adult, the term within Unitarian Universalism of young adult technically spanned 18 to 35, which as we all know is just ridiculous. Because what's going on with an 18-year-old and a 35-year-old can be just wildly different. And so recently,
youth,
what's that mean?
Youth used to be 12 to 22. I'm
right,
just...
and youth used to be 12 to 22. So we've recently, I think within the past 2 to 3 years, started changing that language a little bit and talking about, as you guys have, emerging adult and young adult. And the emerging adult is intended to really try and hit that span between, I don't know if we've actually clarified it. I think it's 18 to 22 is the last time, 20, Carrie, what is 24? And so to really kind of capture what it means to be bridging out of youth, you know, the youth world in Unitarian Universalism into a different world that isn't necessarily, you know, a bricks and mortar church, particularly if you're going into the military, if you're getting a job, if you're going to college, versus, you know, what you do after some of those things. So I think it's really important that, you know, something that you all are already talking about really naturally, emerging adults, is something that, you know, communities and congregations really need to be looking at.
Yeah, a couple of things on that. So I think a big reason why it is 18 to 24 is when you're 25, you can be a youth sponsor at youth events. And so there, you know, once you're 25, you can go back, not back into that community, but you have more of the support and structure of that. And then 18 to 24-year-olds kind of, they can't be in youth community because they're too old. They can't be in like a sponsor or adult community because they're too young. And so that's really where we've all kind of, you know, they call it cliffing. If you instead of bridging, it's you just fall off that cliff right into that gap. And so we're trying to make that more of a bridge by having these really intentional communities for emerging adults. I know when I was a senior in high school, I was the oldest person in my youth group. Most of the people were my sister's age. She's 2 years younger than me, or freshman in high school. And so when I turned 18, because I was still a senior, but I was 18, so I started going to the young adult group at my church. And it was all like late 20s, early 30s. Some people were a little bit older than 35. And it was not my community, but it was the only thing that was available for me. So I think definitely focusing on having that distinction that yes, 18-year-olds are young adults, but they're also very different young adults than a 34 or 35-year-old is an important thing when creating young adult communities.
I think there's also a real difference, at least I'm thinking back to my days as youth director when it was CUYAN at the time. It was a lot of young adults who found Unitarian Universalism as young adults, and in a way kind of needed to relive a youth they didn't get to have before. And so there were times when the YRUU kids were way more mature than the CUYAN people and kind of looked that way and said, I don't don't make me go over there. And I just wonder about this new thing since I was there of emerging adults, which makes all the sense in the world. Do the communities tend to be folks who grew up UU and are still there, or a lot of new emerging adults also just finding us and coming in? Because I know people do find us in when we have places to find us on campuses and stuff.
So I think it's always a combination of both. The majority of emerging adults that I interact with have been UU since at least they were a youth. Again, not true of everyone. One thing I want to point out as well is I think congregations and communities really need to focus on not just their youth and not just their young adults, but the transition between the two and preparing their youth for that transition. You know, Carrie talked about cliffing and what that feels like, and how sometimes it feels like congregations and communities and the UU faith over promises. They're like, don't worry, you're becoming this amazing young adult and we have all these amazing things for you. Don't worry about it at all. But being real with youth as they come up and giving them examples of what real community is there. One of the things that's amazing is Camp de Venneville Pines, our Southern California UU camp. It's in Big Bear, beautiful. They do senior high camps, so high school age camps, week long in the winter and in the summer. And there are adult advisors that are 25 plus, and then there's obviously youth, and then staff who are youth who run programming. And then there's also 2 to 3 what they call spirits. And these spirits are people who have bridged, we call it circling over there. So people have circled a year or more ago. So they have to be out for an entire year, and then they can come back, just a few of them can come back and be a link from the emerging adult community to the youth community. They're treated like adult advisors, so they're not like peers with the youth, but they hold workshops on what life looks like after bridging. They they're there as like a chaplain presence for youth who are for the youth who are bridging, so they can go and talk to them, and they've been through it. Basically, it's not adults who went through it 8, 9, 10 years ago. It's people who went through it a year ago. So just lifting that up is a practice we have here, and I'm sure other folks have similar things, but preparing your youth for that transition is so important, not just telling them, hey, it's fine, there's stuff, you'll figure it out, but really showing them what life looks like, I think is pivotal.
I think also a thing about raised UU emerging adults versus ones who are discovering the faith. I moved across the country for college, and I really wanted to find a UU church in Boston that I wanted to go to. You know, there are a lot of UU churches in Boston, so I had my pick. So first fall semester, I kind of spent at church hopping, and I visited a bunch of different ones. And it was really fun for me as a pretty well-known youth slash young adult to go into these churches where they didn't know who I was mostly, and see how I was received and if I was welcomed or not, as just some random young adult. They don't know if I was raised UU or anything. And it wasn't a great experience most of the time. It was a great experience when I saw somebody I knew, because we just happened to stumble upon each other, and then I was welcomed in. But I can really imagine somebody who maybe found out about Unitarian Universalism online and decided to check out a church, and as a 19 or 20-year-old walks in and is completely ignored for a full service. Why would they want to go back? And I keep going back because I know what our churches can be, and I know the potential for these communities. But that's because I was raised UU. It's because I've had these really incredible experiences in other parts of my life. So that's the thing I really worry about. I wanted to introduce a lot of my friends in college to Unitarian Universalism because I talk about it a lot. And some of them have come with me to church. And I kind of don't really want to take them to like a Sunday morning church for their first experience with Unitarian Universalism. I want to bring them straight to GA. I want to bring them to Sanctuary. I want to bring them to a youth experience. But I think that we need to find some way to show people on the very first time they set foot in a church what this community could have for them.
I've said to the congregation where I am that we would do fine if we stopped repelling people and stopped behaving like a club, because and then they get hurt, like I'm just trying to hurt their feelings. So I would invite you to write a blog post for the UUA to let them know of your experience, because you know, as growing up UU and how active you've been, Carrie and Tanner, what we can be, just what you said. And so coming into the brick and mortar spaces, and it's not about not being well-meaning. It's that, do we experience ourselves, we Unitarian Universalists, as a faith that is open to all and invitational all the time? And unfortunately, our brick and mortar places more often than not don't experience themselves that way. And that's part of the problem of why we're not growing, as because I think if we just stopped repelling people, we'd just be exponentially bigger. And people don't I don't know what there is to not believe about that. And somehow, like, you know, somehow like the religious educator, the minister has some magic thing that they need to do. And it's not about one person. It's about how you're treated by everyone who's already there and how they embody what Unitarian Universalism is.
Well, and that's part of the opportunity of this time. Oh, I'm sorry, Christina, go ahead. That's part of the opportunity of this time. We could create a different culture online. And that's, you know, as we've been doing in these shows for the past month about the pandemic, saying, don't recreate white supremacist capitalistic culture. It's an opportunity not to be perfectionist. It's an opportunity to be welcoming and joyful and, you know, break out. And as you said, Aisha, even putting people in with folks they don't know to talk to them, to have real connection can be really powerful. Then the question is how to sustain that in a meaningful way. Because, you know, you can be in a great small group, you can be in a really rotten one. I mean, we've probably all done it by now. And it's all about how vulnerable the people you're with are willing to be. So, because the other thing I was going to say, what I hear from young people and other marginalized people and people of color, and Carrie, you're walking in with a couple of identities there, is it's either ignore you or like fall all over you in a way that makes you want to run out the door, right? And neither of those is just human and welcoming and you know, hi, how are you? Here's who I am, you know? So yeah, but it's a chance now.
Yeah, I think when I heard about Carrie's experiences, you know, visiting those congregations, so my goal when I was a UUA Board of Trustee member was to visit every single one of the Boston congregations while I was at board meetings. You know, we usually had a Sunday available, and you know, I too experienced those same kind of non-welcomes, and sometimes, as Meg said, the opposite welcome of, you know, just the, oh, it's a person of color. Let's just glom onto them. So I'm wondering, Carrie, and just for folks to know, I asked Carrie before I asked her this question, if I could ask her this question, because it's not okay to just randomly ask Black, Indigenous, POC questions related to their identity. I just want to model that for you all, that I asked her permission to talk about this before we're doing it. But I'm wondering what your experience is like moving from the BIPOC youth community into the young adult community, because the Black, Indigenous, people of color youth community can be fairly tight in Unitarian Universalism. And I wonder what that feels like going into the young adult community.
Yeah, it's definitely tight. And I think I would add to that, not even going from that community, but also moving to Boston and the young adult community there, which is very, very white. Yeah, that's been really interesting for me. Something I was actually thinking about was, as I was saying, I didn't want to take my friends from college to church on Sunday mornings. I was even thinking there were a couple of my friends in college who were women of color, and they like, if they were talking, we were talking about theology, and it was like, wow, you would really love Unitarian Universalism. This seems so perfect for you. And especially a lot of my friends are queer and had to leave communities where they weren't welcome as queer people. I was like, wow, this is great. We should all go to church. And then I stopped And I thought, if we all come into this church, like, how are they going to feel going into a church that is 95% white? And so I have been a little anxious about if I wanted to bring them into that. And I know how uncomfortable that they would feel. I think I feel pretty at home because I've grown up in these spaces that forget how jarring it can be for people just coming into that space. And so it's kind of, it's on both sides, because if we don't welcome people into these spaces, they're going to continue to be really unwelcoming. And so what does it take? What do we need to do to break that cycle?
I had a friend once when I was still in Jersey, and I talked so much about Unitarian Universalism, and I finally took her to a congregation, and one of the first things she said to me, she goes, "Wow, I didn't expect it to be so white with how you talk about Unitarian Universalism." And I'm like, yeah. So now I actually, when I have friends who will say, no matter where they are, like, "Oh, I want to try UU Church," I will look up who the minister is, who the religious educator is. I mean, I don't give blanket, or I'll just say, "Here's an online worship." Like, I don't, and it's sad. It's sad because I'm passionate about Unitarian Universalism, and I want to know, people who want to find spiritual sustenance, young adults, youth, adults, want to be held and go somewhere to feel a connection, not be ignored. And so it's sad that this is still going on. This is the same conversation that we've been having for decades, Meg, and so maybe this pandemic is expanding our, like Blue expanded our imagination, Drum, like their thing, Thrive, the multicultural leadership school for youth, and is Thrive the same name for the one for young adults? I should know that. Yeah. And so our imaginations are expanding. How do we continue to hold on to that and continue the transformation to be the faith that the world needs us to be?
I think it's really great that you mentioned Thrive Young Adult, Asia, because I think part of it is the intentionality, right? We're talking about the intentionality of, carving out emerging adult from young adult. So what does the intentionality look like within those communities to make sure that we are providing resources and support for folks from marginalized identities within those communities. So, if I feel like, if we feel like we don't do a great job at supporting BIPOC youth, it's almost non-existent for young adults, with the exception of Thrive Young Adult. And so how are we continuing to understand that it's a life, like everything is faith formation, supporting Unitarian Universalists with marginalized identities has to be a lifelong process. And so we need to be really intentional when we're looking at those different cohorts of how we're supporting them, and not assuming that the support from one is going to look like the same in the other.
I think I'd never heard the language of cliffing. It's a heartbreaking word to learn today, and so real. And I grew up UU, and not a single adult, including my parents, ever said, "Gee, I hope you'll stay." Everyone was like, "Explore, find what works for you." And so I kind of felt like I would be a loser if I couldn't find anything better, because no one seemed to be saying, "This is great. We're so glad we found it, and we want you to have it." So I always say to every youth and young adult I ever talk to, like, it matters to me. I want you here. Like, you make a difference. You build my faith. I need you. But I remember with some embarrassment, my first GA ever, I had just read Mark Morrison Reed's book, Black Pioneers in the White Denomination. It was the mid-'80s. And I related to the stories of the Black pioneers who nobody would welcome and no one would support. And of course, there was part of that was a real naivete about my own power and privilege. But so I went up to Mark, who I didn't know at all, after his talk at GA and burst into tears. And all I could say was, I grew up UU. And Mark being, if you know Mark, he's just the hugger of all huggers. He just hugged me. And, you know, but I look back on that with embarrassment. But I also think that people of color have named for all of us the lack of welcome that many people, for many reasons, class, ability, so many reasons, are now also, you know, learning to articulate. And so it's, as Christina says, it's so exciting to think about really shining the light of what faith formation looks like every step of the way. And it's exciting to me to hear, even though it's a sad word to hear that it's being named and addressed, and that there are, you know, that there are people who are really focusing on that. So I wonder, are BIPOC youth or young adults or emerging adults gathering now online in this time of pandemic?
I haven't experienced any BIPOC specific spaces, but there are a ton of emerging adult spaces that I've been a part of. Reverend Stevie has a Google Doc that has a huge list of everything that is being put out by a lot of sources, and it's continuing to grow. And that's where I get my resources from. So reaching out to him is a great first step for people looking for that space.
That's a fabulous idea. Is that Google Doc available? Can that be posted on our website? Is
I
it
think
a public Google Doc, or?
it's been private just to keep the privacy and security settings, but emailing Stevie and getting, if you could post his contact information, he's a great first step for anybody looking for that.
So we're coming close to the top of the hour, and of course, many of the co-hosts here have either soon to be bridged or recently bridged young adults in our homes. But I'm wondering specifically, Tanner and Carrie, if you have any words of wisdom for the soon to be bridging seniors, particularly as they are bridge. I mean, it's always a bridge into the unknown, but it feels right now like it's even more so. So I'm wondering if you have any advice or words of encouragement or anything for that cohort.
Absolutely. The first thing I want to lift up is I think a lot of what we've been talking about has been ministry on mission. Like, what does it look like for churches to say one thing? And then what does it look like for churches to actually do that thing? So my first piece of advice doesn't go to youth. It goes to congregations and other communities. It's that if you're going to talk the talk, I don't want to say walk the walk is very ableist. I'm going to say move the move, I guess. You know, invest in your young people programs, your youth programs, your young adult programs. Give them time, give them money, right? Those types of things. Don't expect all that work to be done for free. So just to throw that out there as advice to congregations and communities, to really invest, because it's one thing to say it and another thing to do it. And that's ministry on mission right there. And then my advice to youth who are bridging is that even though it feels like everything is over and the world is just collapsing, I know I felt like I'm never gonna find a community like that again. Just look around you and see that all those people that are bridging with you, that's your community. That's what you're going into this world with, this new world with. Those are the people that you've hopefully built bonds with. So even when you get to the other side, if there's no one there waiting for you, the people that you crossed the bridge with are there. And if we can stay together like that, I think that's a really important thing we can do. Like, we can link arms, cross that bridge together, and that'll create stronger communities. I think sometimes there's this like dystopian, like, oh, it's all on the other side of the bridge, like there's something there, when really, like, we've got it all right here. So that would be my advice to bridging seniors.
Yeah, I would say, Meg, I know that hearing the word cliffing was disheartening for you, but I like to talk about it because I think that people need to be worried and scared that we're losing our young adults. When I was a junior in high school, I ended up giving the bridging homily since we didn't have any bridgers that year. And I told my congregation how scared I was of cliffing and how I didn't want that to happen to me. And throughout my junior and senior years of high school, I was so deathly afraid of that. After the last youth worship at GA, I held one of the candles in my hand and I ended up not ever turning it off until its battery eventually died a couple months later because I wasn't ready to say goodbye and I was so scared. But it's been almost exactly a year since I bridged from my con community last year. And I'm here to tell you that it doesn't happen to every youth. And I have been involved. I have ministers who are mentors and friends for me. I am still connected to my congregation. I love seeing them over the holidays and now virtually, now that I'm back home. And I also have communities in college. And part of that is being in the hub of Unitarian Universalism in Boston. But these communities are everywhere and you have to look a little harder to find it and you have to persevere. But it's not impossible. And we're success stories because we're here right now. So I hope that in a year from now, I will still be as involved and not burnt out and loving Unitarian Universalism as much as I do.
We are towards the end of their show. I want to make sure that that Carrie and Tanner, anything that you make sure you wanted to say, you get a chance to say it. Sometimes folks come and they're like, "Oh, I want to make sure I get this one thing out." So, any last words? You are welcome to make it about whatever you want to make it about.
I just want to throw it out there to youth out there that you never know what's going to happen after bridging. I bridged, and then a couple months later, I was hired by the Church of the Larger Fellowship, and now I'm on paid staff of one of the largest congregations. And that's been like so amazing to me because I got to take all the skills and everything I did as a youth and like turn it into an actual like fulfilling career path. So that's been really, really amazing. So to the youth out there, there's so much more beyond the bridge.
Yeah, I think that one thing I hope that we get out of this pandemic is that things can be online and it doesn't have to always be in person, and how we continue these communities, especially for young adults who are so spread out, after we can all go outside of our homes and go to physical church. I really look forward to seeing how that continues to be a space for us.
Thank you so much, Carrie Gottfried and Tanner Linden, for coming and joining us today on The VUU. We really, really appreciate you being here and giving us your perspective on this new world. Next week on The VUU, we have the Commission on Institutional Change, who are introducing the report on theology and living our values in the world. We look forward to seeing everybody next week. Take care, everyone.